Hey, welcome! This is Jelle growing bonsai and this is part 2, well actually part 3 of growing an elm from seed into this little bonsai. In this video I will cover part 3 and part 3 is all about growing it from a trunk, the trunk that I have grown in part 2, into this little bonsai. Part 1 was of course how do you germinate the seeds and how do you get these little seedlings to establish. Let's go back a few years in time. Let's see what it ended up in number 2. And now that this is wired, it has three-dimensional movement. This just goes back into the garden. Of course, I could now also prune these upper branches, but I'll just let this extend for another, I don't know, 3-4 weeks. Then I'll unwire, prune the whole thing back, and then I expect another explosion of inner branches, hopefully with smaller leaves, because these are getting really big. But this would actually be quite suitable. So yeah, be back in a couple of weeks. 2 weeks have passed since I wired this and you can see the branches have extended enormously. In theory I could remove the wire, but I'm going to leave it on for another 1 or 2 weeks. But what I am going to do is I'm going to reduce these upper canopy branches a little bit. This way they won't fatten up all that much. These I want to fatten up a lot more. This one just a little bit, so I'm just removing the growing tip, and these two can shoot just like the main. This is all there is to do right now. Now I'm going to put it back in the garden, and in 2 weeks or so I'm going to clean up this wound. I'm going to unwire, going to prune everything back, and I'm going to defoliate. At that point I expect lots and lots of backbudding to occur in all these branches, and I will double or triple the number of branches on this tree. But for now, a little bit longer in the sun. Now another 2 weeks have passed, and if you look carefully here at these branches, you see that they're slowly going from bright green to, I don't know, almost brown. To me that's a sign the branches are lignifying and I can actually take the wire off. The wire is not really biting yet, but let's take a look and see what it looks like once I remove the wire, whether there's any traces. If you look carefully, you can see a little groove there, there and there, and that is from the wire. So it had started to expand around the wire, but I am pretty certain this will disappear still this season. What else is obvious is that these lower branches are now substantially thicker than the upper ones, which I didn't allow to grow out. And because they are swaying in the wind, they might actually start hanging a little bit. I'm going to just shorten them. I'm not going to prune them back all this much, but just enough so that they're a little bit more stable. These large leaves will aid in further strengthening it. And the top branch I am going to allow to grow a little bit more, because now I'm going to look at this cut here. This cut was of course a very crude cut here on top, and I'm just going to, with a concave cutter, remove a part of it, allowing it to grow over the course of the season. It seems like my concave cutter is bent. I need to check that. Normally it is sharp enough to just cleanly cut this off. Now it clearly isn't anymore. Fortunately there's always a carpet knife around. But I've made quite a mess of this wound here. I'll leave it at this, and I'll just add a little bit of cut paste and then allow it time to grow over. This is such a surprise. It has fattened up enough, and it's only the middle of June. So I can now, well, this is the front, so I want this bud to pop. I'm going to clip this off here. And to be honest, it is only showing growth here at the tips. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just defoliate completely and see whether I can trigger lower buds on these branches. Because I want side branches, I don't want long extended branches. This is actually a side branch, that's good. Let's see whether this will trigger side branches. And off in the sun again. Right, this is what elms do. You just leave them alone for a little bit, you water them, you fertilize them, and they shoot out. So really, in order to get better trees, you need to frequently prune these. Here this branch is going so quickly that it is going to overpower the top again. So I'm going to clip that back. Same here, one of these little side branches. And this is what you need to do throughout summer. And as it is developing and getting denser and denser, you need to be more frequently pruning this. Otherwise, it is just going to be one big ball of green, which might be nice. You might say, well, hey, that is nice and healthy. But in practice, it only means that you have an overgrown plant. I could, of course, now also consider adding a little bit of wire, but I'm a little lazy today. Use a little dead trunk, dead stump, remove that, keeping the side branch, so I get a bifurcation here. Prune this back a little bit. Actually, this needs to go to the back, not to the front. Now there's a trifurcation, prune, prune. Remove the upper one, keep the lower one, so that you get a natural downward fashion. Here, this is in the elbow, I remove that. Because in the end, a tree doesn't have branches on the inside of the tree. It sits from the trunk, but directly here in an elbow, no. So you see, there's very, very little that needs to be removed. It is a very quick job, but you need to do this regularly to get any ramification, any shape, and particularly here in the top, the tree wants to grow very, very strong, and we're not going to let them. I'm always keeping the outward pointing leaves, because that is also where the buds are. There, outward pointing buds. If I keep the inward pointing, what happens, do you think? Then I get branches to grow into the tree, so that's also not great. Why are there so many branches here? Oh yeah, opposing branches. I'm taking one of the opposing branches out. There we go. Back into shape. And slowly this will now start to ramify, I hope. But this is a bit of an annoying species that doesn't really like to have a lot of back, but it really mainly grows from the last cut. Also a reason for frequent cutting back, and then just keeping 1 or 2 nodes more than you left the previous time. That way you build up your ramification. Right. Well done. But look at that. Here this wound starting to heal over. This wound really starting to push. This will go places. We're in the middle of August, and one thing is very, very clear. This particular species of elm is not very willing to throw new branches. Normally, once you remove the growing tip, at every base of every single leaf you'll get side branches popping, but in this particular species that is not happening. Now what can we do? Well, quite easily said, we could completely defoliate. So that is actually what I'm going to try to do with this tree. Next to that, there's another thing that you might notice. The top is growing a lot faster than these branches here. So I have to remedy that as well. And how do you remedy that? Well, very easy. You just remove most of the growth in the top as soon as you don't want the top to develop any further. So this balances out the power that the top has compared to the rest of the tree. Then I said I was going to defoliate. And how do you defoliate? Well, very simple. It's just a matter of removing all the leaves at the base. Next to that, I also remove the growing tip. And what this will do, it will completely change the whole hormonal balance in the tree. And I hope that by doing this, the tree is triggered into growing a lot of side branches. Now here on this one branch, I'm going to leave the growing tip in place, because this is one of the lowest branches and I really wanted to fatten up. And no, I don't really like elm coffee. So just as a comparison, if you look at this elm tree, you see at every single bud there is a little side branch, and here I've actually not even removed the growing tip. This is just doing it by itself. So this one ramifies a lot easier than the one that I'm working on now. And that's something to realize, I think. Just because you know how one elm species grows doesn't mean that you know how another grows. These two, they sit next to each other on the bench, So they have a very similar climate. They get watered at the same time, they get fertilized at the same time, yet they respond very differently. Now this is also one of those branches that sits quite low and still needs to develop, but not as much as the low ones that I had here. So this I'm also going to prune back. This of course is also an ideal time to wire out the plant if you want to do so. Now using defoliation as a development technique is of course only useful when the tree is very healthy. If you do this on a tree that is not all this healthy, then instead of getting a very strong backbudding response, you will get a much weaker tree that probably doesn't do all that much. Now I have a little video on the linden that was weak, and there I did do a defoliation on a weaker tree, and that was because I was worried that the leaves themselves were infected with a fungus or a mite infection. But typically this sort of work is only done on a very healthy, vigorous tree like this one. This will now go back into the sun. I am going to add a little bit of fertilizer and then let's see what it looks like in a couple of weeks. I would say that worked quite well. There's quite a few young branches now also on the inside and not only at the tip. What I am noticing, however, is that this crown is getting quite congested, so I could thin it out, but for the sake of taper and movement, I prefer to just cut back every once in a while. In this case, just removing this, then this branch becomes the new leader. Now I should actually give that a tiny little bit of wire so that it comes back forward. Let me do that. And then I'm going to look at some other things that I see happening here in these junctions that you really need to pay attention to. Now it happens all over the tree, but here it is quite clear at this lower branch. What you see is you have here a junction of two branches, and then there's two young branches that have popped up right at the junction itself. And these you need to remove, otherwise you get a very thick fat swelling here at the base. Typically these occur on places where you've pruned before, so that's where I start checking. This is an old pruning site. This is okay, this is a pipe verbification. Here everything is okay except for here. There's a tiny little growth here. That's the leaf. Yeah, that's all okay, but I don't want this to extend, so I'm just going to nip the growing tip if I can find it. There it is. Here on top is a lot of different little buds, so that can go and that can go, and I'll also have only biverbifications here. This is very close to the base, so I'll remove that one. And now pretty much it is cleaned up, ready to go. I've not cleaned up this cut. I'm just going to allow this first to extend a little bit, and then I'm going to clean it up. I could clean it up now, but yeah. Don't know why I don't actually. Now here, this doesn't help anymore. This is now a nice branch, and here I'm also going to cut back a little bit. Here this one is getting quite long. I can remove a part of it. Well, let's go to the first growing point. Here, this is a long branch that I don't really need that long. You see, pruning is just something that you continuously need to do with your trees. Guess this is now ready, I can just let it grow, and the full wiring, as said before, I might do over winter. November, growing season is over. Time for a final prune of this tree before I put it in a nice spot and show you the final display after, what is it, 3-4 years? Let me check, I don't know. Anyway, look at how this has developed. The removal of leaves, as I'm doing now, has really aided in increasing the ramification. I can now go through and I say, well, this is a little old pruning mark, and I'm just removing the little pruning leftovers, and I'm pruning this extension back to the first bud so it doesn't get all that strong. In fact, it is strong already. Remove the whole segment and gently go through the whole tree and do a final pruning. This is also the time in early fall to say, well, maybe I'm going to do a light wiring of this tree so that you position the branches, and in early spring, as the tree is pushing again, you can remove the wire again, because by that time young branches that have formed this year will most likely have completely set in shape. Now it might be worth my while to try and do that, because right now if you look at it, it does have structure and it does have branches, but it is quite chaotic. Still, I don't want a long branch here. I don't want long branch extensions there. This is too long. This is okay, maybe a little long. This is a little long. This is a little long. Right. All pruned. Do I now still need to wire? Could. Shall I? Maybe I should. And there we have it. All wired out, ready to go back into the garden for winter. There's of course still this little cut to be dealt with, but I'm going to do that in spring as it starts to push. And in spring I'm also going to take it out of the pot and put it in a nicer pot. But this is really now starting to develop in a nice little tree. This is of course not a very advanced bonsai, but as a starter tree, just from seed, I think it has potential. And we are headed into April. We see the buds are swelling, so I brought a little pot from the trophy. Let's put this tree in this pot. Get all this thing together and flushing and growing and fall of leaves. I think this is going to look really, really nice. I have not tied it into place, so I can just lift it out. Look at those healthy roots. That is amazing. Let's clean those out. Using a root hook, just going around, teasing out all these circling roots. This is a healthy tree. Look at that. Cool. Might have to really rethink the pot because this root ball needs to be reduced drastically. But then again, I did prepare this to be in a small pot. I did work the roots well over the last years. It should be possible to get it in a small container. But the way you look at these circling roots, I really can't believe this. Look at that. This is not just one or two circling roots, right? This is a whole pot full of them. This is a good indication that this tree last year did really well. I think I'm going to have to get some root cutters. And that is probably most of the root ball in one go. Well, this is all come off. Look at that. I really would like to entangle them. Yeah, well, you know. Now that is healthy root growth. This is what elms do. Now of course I'm not done with this. Here I still need to get this to the size that it fits in this pot. So still more needs to go. But because I've been preparing this root ball for years, it should be quite easy to now just make it a very shallow flat root ball. So I'm going around and around, continuing what I was doing, pulling out all these roots that have grown across the root ball, all the way from top to bottom, gently loosening it up and going in 2 or 3 times if I have to. And now I can just from the bottom start pruning this root ball back. Big root, okay, continue. I'll get to the big root in a second. Let's start off with all this fluff. And because I've done this frequently, I'm not risking too much. There's still a lot of fine roots here close to the base. I'm just going to look here. This is where I pruned them before. And I'm just going to quickly prune these big stumps back further because I don't want them to dominate the root ball too much. Just like that. This is a root that awkwardly comes across, that is now visible. There we go. And adding substrate in normal root balls, this is actually very shallow and open, but you use a little chopstick to make sure you work the substrate in between the roots so that there's no air pockets. Once this is all done, watering and back in the garden. And then just wait for spring to really hit in all its might. Spring has come and it is showing. I think this is now pretty cool, to be honest. There's of course these little things that pop up from the trunk that I can now remove. In theory I can start rewiring all these branches that are growing. In fact, for further development I don't really want heavy top growth, so I can now start really tipping these branches as they come up. This I want to develop. I still don't like this pruning scar, it is closing over. This backside is actually much better. Might have to work a little bit on this branch. But all in all, this shows the process of how you can develop a small little bonsai in a matter of a few years, just from finding seeds, germinating them. It's funny how within a week or two things can really change. It has started to push again a little bit. So one thing I wanted to say before I'm going to leave you with your thoughts on why didn't I do like Jelle and just grab a few elm seeds off the street 5 years ago, because I would have a nice little tree. One recommendation: if you go and look for elm seeds of trees that have naturally small leaves. Because even though it's in a pot, even though it is already somewhat ramified, the leaves do tend to grow big. And of course they start off small. In the beginning of the year you have very small leaves, but as the branch gets stronger, the leaves get stronger. And then you have a lot of pruning to do to keep everything looking a little bit to scale. Naturally, the more branches you get on a tree, the more the leaves will shrink and stay smaller, because the tree just doesn't have all the resources to build large leaves. But this is something to keep in mind when you're selecting seeds. Get seeds of a tree that already has reasonably small leaves, because it is much easier to get everything in scale. That's not just for elm, right? This is for most bonsai species. Pick something that already works. If you try to get something special, you might find out that the special species is not used because it's too special. It doesn't really do well in bonsai care. Anyway, this was part 2, maybe 3, depending on how you count, on developing a young little bonsai from seed into, well, I think it looks reasonable. What do you think? Please let me know in the comments whether you like this tree or not. If you actually do like this tree and you have not subscribed, then shame on you. Do that now. It really does help me. You know, I am on my way. I'm really trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. How cool would that be? Now, if you have been enjoying this video and you like these sort of development videos, maybe you want to look at another one that I made of an elm, but then a field stock about this big that it grew out and developed as a bonsai over a couple of years. That is this video. Otherwise, I just invite you to take a look at my last video, the most recent one that's come up. And before I sign off and bid you farewell, pop that like button, pop the subscribe button, drop me a comment. See you next time. This was Jelle, growing bonsai.